Hello once again, everybody, and thank you for joining me here on this special edition of Bang the Book Radio as we're going to chat UFC on ESPN Plus 8, UFC Fight Night here between Jacare and Hermansson with Christian Pina of the Sports Gambling Podcast. If you've missed any additions to the Bettors Box this week, make sure you go and check those out. Also, a lot of great NBA and NHL playoff content over at bangthebook.com to go along with daily Major League Baseball, weekly soccer, tennis, UFC, NASCAR, golf, you name it, we cover it all over there at bangthebook.com. And be on the lookout next week as well for my Kentucky Oaks and Kentucky Derby previews as we get the Triple Crown underway here at the beginning of May. All right, we've got Christian Pina joining me from the Sports Gambling Podcast to chat some UFC with us. Christian, how's it going today, man?
Good, man. Much more exciting and, a lot more to break down on this card than the last one, which was something of the Russian showcase. Russians dominated that one kind of start to finish. So this one, much more diverse, a little bit more out there for the casual fan. Great main event of, a bunch of different narratives going into that one. We got Greg Hardy making his another unwarranted welcome to a co-main event slot as a another unwarranted big favorite. Mike Perry, always a treat. So this one is top to bottom, a much better card than last week. So excited to break it down, man.
Well, it's something I was looking at here. Initially, this card was supposed to be in Miami. And in fact, there have been a ton of changes to this card. A bunch of rescheduled matches are on the card. And then you've got a bunch of people, pulling out here in the lead up to this card. So we've had different competitors added to it. But one thing I did see, and again, we've talked about this before, UFC usually does a pretty good job of doing this. There are quite a few South Florida fighters on the card here in Sunrise, which is near Fort Lauderdale.
Yeah, there is. And look, the more that we think of the UFC as this huge billion-dollar business, in which it is, multi-billions, but as they expand, they're still kind of in this infancy looking for new arenas. And so, it's kind of funny to look at this and think that they should have it all figured out. But this is, they're going to have these growing pains as they search for new venues and things that you would think, the mixed martial arts version of the NFL should have figured out instead of the AAF or XFL. But those type of things will kind of, run amok there. So you'll see that type of progression and growth, and eventually they'll get it figured out. But yeah, as far as, the Floridian fighters on this card, it makes a lot of sense. I mean, people want to see hometown people, hometown guys, girls, all that type of stuff. But as far as where I think you're going to allude to is judging and stuff like that, I really wouldn't worry about it. At the end of the day, everyone's American. And so unless you're in a foreign country, specific places don't really tend to kind of bear out that way,
Right. All right. So as we look at this card here, the main card on ESPN Plus, there are 4 prelim fights. Look like they're on ESPN, and then 3 on ESPN2 to get this thing started. But we'll start from the top down here with the main event, as we usually do. In the middleweight division here, Ronaldo Souza, better known as Jacare, takes on Jack Hermansson. Souza about a $2 favorite here in this one, Christian.
Yeah, and look, I understand it, why it was lined that way, but I don't say I don't agree with it, but I just think that it takes some next level thinking here when you look at this. Now, as last time that we talked about, the last time Hermansson fight, obviously he's making the quick turnaround after the ground and pound stoppage of David Branch. Look, as I talked about in that, fight breakdown, Branch was somebody who was here for a paycheck, who did not want to go to war with Jack Hermansson. And once Hermansson got on top, Branch was going to quit the same way that he tapped out to strikes, to rockhold. We've seen this time and time again. On the other side, I mean, when you look at more of instead of what that means to a guy like David Branch, which I think a lot of people, including myself, kind of saw coming, Hermansson is finally taken the next step in his progression. It's great to see from a guy like that. I mean, he is red hot, consecutive wins over Tally's Ladies, Mirasol, David Branch, of course, that we just touched on. So he's really, looking to break into that title picture for the first time in his career, and it's great to see somebody do that. His ground and pound is some of the most vicious, and when he gets on top of you, guys genuinely are not able to extend the fight or even get out of that or lose a decision, whatever the case may be. Look, that fighters' mindsets is so important to me. Well, I've always talked about fight IQ, all that type of stuff, even more than skills. And when you look at a guy like Jacare Souza, number one, we have seen this exact type of scenario play out with him before. Now, what I mean by that is Jacare doesn't really care. The UFC basically told me he had to fight one more time before he gets his title shot. He said, I don't care who it is. So they gave him Hermansson to see kind of what happens here. Jacare has even said, I will retire if I don't get a title fight after this fight. And so, look, when I say that he has been here before, when he has had, being on the cusp of those title opportunities, he lost the fight before a title fight, what would have been to Yoel Romero. He did the same thing in the fight before a title fight to Robert Whittaker. Same thing on a fight before the title fight to Kelvin Gastelum. That is three trends, 3 opportunities we've seen. And what that means in my mind is that Jacare looks past this fight to the potential title fight. And so I need to see him do it. You would think the second time you would have learned his lesson, the third time you would have learned his lesson. And when you look at a guy like Jacare and Hermansson, who is the best form, the best trajectory, the best momentum, everything is running peak performance here. Hermansson is certainly more hungry to fight Souza than the other way around, as Souza's only doing this to get to that title fight. So Hermansson, a very live underdog here. I would certainly not lay that price with Jacare, no matter what happens here. And I would really lean with Hermansson to take the next step in his progression, while Jacare Souza is going to have to be a man of his word, retire, or see what happens there, because when you make that statement, there's not you can't really come back from it. So we'll see what happens there, but definitely would go with Hermansson.
Well, and that's one of those things too, as you mentioned, Hermansson pretty good at that ground and pound game. If Souza has really nothing to gain in this fight, he finds himself on the back on the canvas. How much punishment is he actually going to take with the big picture in mind? So I think you got some very interesting, really situational and motivational angles here in this fight, to be sure.
Definitely. And now look, it is, in the past, Jacare Souza probably the better all-around fighter than Hermansson in the, prior stages of Hermansson's UFC career, 100%. But the way that he is looking, the way he has elevated his game is something that you definitely cannot, look past if you're Jacare. And again, we've seen this 3 straight times now that he has looked past this exact situation. So again, if he learned his lesson the second time, okay, but I don't know how you can even get through, not learning your lesson the second time, not learning your lesson the third time. I mean, fool me once, fool me twice, fool me 3 times, all that type of stuff. So I got to see him, make that leap from the Souza side before I could ever get on board with him here.
All right, and as we look at this card here, Greg Hardy, the biggest favorite by a large margin of anybody here on this UFC on ESPN Plus 8 card. You don't really think it's warranted?
No, and I broke this down when Hardy made his UFC debut. Now, I'm not going to, he's a very controversial, polarizing figure, right? No matter your feelings of domestic violence, no matter your feelings of all that type of stuff, let's just look at this from inside the octagon. He is a raw fighter. He is a green fighter who beat up on gas cans during the Ultimate Fighter so that the UFC could market this professional football player with this checkered past who knocks everybody out and drive the conversation to that narrative. When I say that he shouldn't be this big of a favorite, you're paying at the top of the market. Now, again, when we talked about that first fight in his debut, I bet against Greg Hardy. I said I probably think that Hardy would win. I expect this bet to lose, but long term, there's usually prospects when they step up into the cage or on prelims. He was in the co-main event against I wouldn't say a gas can, but an experienced octagon fighter instead of who he was going up against. Now, yes, I won, and a lot of people would say you got lucky, but to me, I mean, the experience that he lacked was a very big factor in why I, made that philosophical decision more than an MMA handicapping one to bet against him. Now, when we look at this type of fight, I mean, again, unwarranted favorite this big. You're paying for what he was doing to guys who weren't even UFC caliber fighters. And that is the reason why you're paying a -325 if you want to get in bed with Greg Hardy. So this to me is the same exact thing philosophically. Would I be surprised if Hardy won? Absolutely not. But I'm not going to lay over $3 when I look at a guy like Smoliakov, who has been around the block, has all the experience that Greg Hardy does not. And not to mention, I mean, he, did some things in his UFC career that, Hardy can only dream about at this point. He's been around. So we know what to expect. This is going to be, in my opinion, Greg Hardy coming out all out blitz. If Smoliakov can weather that, he can use his experience, use every skill that Hardy hasn't developed besides his knockout power to get, a little bit of exploit that cardio and win a decision while frustrating Hardy along the way. As long as he can weather that first storm there, I think that Smoliakov has all the skills to take Hardy to a decision and win.
Well, and the thing too, again, you always talk about paths to victory. And this is a guy that, in his 11 professional fights in Smoliakov, all of them by stoppage. He's got 4 knockout wins, 4 submission wins. And as you mentioned, a decision could be a possibility here as well. A lot of paths to victory for a +360 dog or +260 dog.
Yeah, I mean, Smoliakov got to the UFC with a record of 8-0. And then, basically, kind of the bright lights of the UFC got to him, right? Got submitted by Henrique da Silva, knocked out by Cyril Asker, and we haven't really seen him since. So This is, he does have one submission win since then, but to me, this is, going 8-0 on the regional scene. And I know Hardy did everything that he did on the regional scene, but this is a guy that's at least been in the UFC. Granted, things probably didn't go his way. And again, I think that there is just a path to victory for a guy like Smoliakov. And when you're looking at all the outside factors, experience, I know that, Hardy got his feet under him, which makes this one a little bit likely. But again, philosophically, I can't go with a minus 325. I'm not going to bet a minus 325 favorite in his second pro UFC fight in the main event when the lights are again bright. Now I know he'll probably handle it a little bit better. And again, the DQ victory was certainly fluky and certainly lucky. But again, that goes back to an experience thing of a raw fighter not knowing the moment when you can't deliver that knee. So the same thing could happen here. It could be a cautionary tale of being pushed too far too soon.
Alex Oliveira and Mike Perry here in the welterweight division. And this looks like a pretty interesting fight for a variety of different reasons. One of them being that Perry added to this card little ago. So this isn't as short notice as some of the ones that we usually get.
Yeah, and when you look at a guy like Perry, I mean, a little bit of a fall from grace is probably an overstatement. I don't think he's quite fighting for his UFC career here, but he's really developing his game, and he's had mixed results is the easiest way to say it. Perry was a one-dimensional knockout artist with some of the heaviest hands in the division, and he's really tried to, be more well-rounded. A lot more of his fights have gone to decisions lately, but, Perry is learning on the fly is the best way that I could put it for how he's kind of, changing his game. And again, you're going to have mixed results like that. We see that time and time again when guys try to make that next logical progression, knowing you can't just survive long-term on one thing. And you can do it for a while. We've seen that with Ngannou. We're seeing it now with Manny Bermudez, but it's going to be interesting when that one type of, when that one path isn't there for you, that you have to be able to be, very diversified. And Mike Perry is showing signs, but he's not there yet. And that being said, Oliveira is not the type of guy that you want to kind of test your progression in there against. He's just too good. This is, you're in theory a kind of a striker versus grappler, but if Oliveira can be at distance, use his takedowns, those are going to be the key to victory for him here. Not sitting in the pocket and trading with Mike Perry, as has been shown to be that blueprint. So he has to kind of stick and move, stay at distance, and frustrate Mike Perry, and takedowns, and he should be able to walk away with a decision victory here.
All right, so as we look at the rest of the main card here, you've got Teixeira and Cutelaba, you've got Lineker and Sandhagen, and then there's like Roberts and Gifford, at least according to Wikipedia, wrapping up the main card here. So anything about those three fights stand out to you that you want to touch on?
I mean, not really. Look, Glover Teixeira and Cutelaba. Teixeira is the much more, we always talk about this, he's the much more well-rounded fighter, but Cutelaba has the heavier hands. And so when you look at this stylistically, their wrestling, in my opinion, is just about going to cancel each other out, which means that this fight is likely to take place on the feet. So for that, I would definitely side with a small side on Cutelaba, just because I think that where this fight takes place stylistically, he's more well equipped and has the skills to handle it a little bit better than Teixeira. Not saying it's going to be a knockout, but I think both of these guys know that their wrestling is so equal that it's, they may try it, it may get a little boring, but it's just going to be chain wrestling, standing up, and a little bit of a boring fight here. So I think eventually this fight stays on the feet. And again, Cutelaba, minus 120 price, not bad there. Sandhagen, Lineker. Look, Sandhagen has been finishing everyone, is an absolute stud. Lineker, Johnny Hands of Stone, is one of my favorite fighters in the UFC. Back and forth fight. This one is really lined appropriately with Lineker, just I think based on the experience and what he's done in the UFC, a slight favorite, certainly the biggest test of Sandhagen's career there as well. Roosevelt, Roberts, Gifford, I don't have much there as the big favorite. Roosevelt Roberts has looked incredible as of late at minus 380. He has a rocket on his back in this lightweight division, and if he doesn't kind of smell himself a little bit, if he doesn't take Gifford lightly, he should be able to finish this fight along the way. But Gifford is an accomplished knockout artist and stoppage artist in his own right. So if he takes him lightly, I think you'll know pretty soon there. But not a ton other than that on those three fights.
Now, I remember last week, I believe there was only one women's fight, and the Shevchenko that doesn't have all of the UFC success was a loser there in that one in a split decision, probably a little bit controversial there. Two women's fights on this card. Anything about either one of those you want to touch on?
Yeah, I mean, Esparza, look, I think everyone kind of falls criminal to underrating her a little bit with what she does in the wrestling game. But her, and when you look at Jandiroba, she doesn't have the striking that Esparza does. She's working on it, and Esparza certainly does not have good striking by any means, but she's making a little bit of leaps and bounds and stuff that we haven't seen there. Again, this to me is just something that's going to go to the scorecards, take the smaller price, more experienced fighter in Esparza if you want to there. But that's a dead over in my opinion. On the other side, Esquibel and Hill, look, Angela Hill minus 545 favorite. I've always thought Esquibel could kind of take it to the next level. This is the same thing. She's going to give Angela Hill the fight that she wants, which is a lot of moving in circles, jabbing, and going to be a very boring 29-28, maybe 30-27 type of decision for Angela Hill. So these are both very cut and dry to me. I don't see any version of a stoppage here. Put those two overs together. Angela Hill by decision makes a ton of sense. It's certainly more of the clear-cut women's fight, in my opinion.
So you're thinking maybe over 2.5 open parlay kinds of things?
I would even go Esparza over 2.5 and Hill Esquibel over 2.5 together and end your two-teamer very early in the night. That way, more than the open, but again, just because I think they're going to be juiced. But again, I have no problem laying the minus 140, minus 150. None of these four women, I should say, have very much stopping power in there. So especially with how these stylistically match up. Angela Hill, I mean, when you look at a minus 545 favorite, usually it's a when, not if type of scenario. That when is kind of dictated here. Angela Hill has zero finishing power in really any area. So all of these are very likely to go to decision. So I would put them together almost.
Well, of course, we're recording this here on Thursday afternoon, so some lines may move around a little bit, and obviously the round props not out at, I think, just about every potential outlet there. So, again, obviously these are things that, if you want, you can always ask Christian on Twitter, at Christian Pina, Pina, his thoughts on some of these round props when they do come out. All right, so the men on the prelim card here. I know you've got some pretty strong thoughts about some of these fights.
Yeah, let's go to Andrei Arlovski and Augusta Sakai. I didn't really get this price when I looked at it, which always makes me kind of do a double tape of what am I missing. I'm not really sure what the legend of Andrei Arlovski did to kind of upset the UFC matchmakers here, because they just consistently give him hard strikers who pressure, who he doesn't have an answer for at this stage of his career. And it's a little bit unfair to him. I don't know. I mean, look, at this point, Arlovski is having these moral victories of being able to survive and go to decisions with these knockout artists. And again, a lot of that is his, veteran prowess, knowing how to, move and all that type of stuff that goes into that. But I mean, pressure is an issue for Arlovski. We've seen this in all of his fights. Arlovski is 2-8 in his last 10. So he's certainly kind of on his last legs, but he is who he is, and he's going to get fights pretty much as long as it's not embarrassing, and as long as he's being competitive or at least taking it to decision. That is something, to at least hang your hat on, and UFC fans surely love seeing him. So it makes sense. Look, Sakai is incredible, man. If this fight was a long time ago, it would have been a very good fight. But Sakai, he's so relentless. The pressure that you will see from him moving forward, backing him down, is just going to be too much. And whether he's able to finally put Arlovski away or he wins a 30-27 decision, I just think that every path to victory points for a guy like Augusta Sakai there.
So in looking at Sakai here, I mean, this is only going to be his second UFC fight. He was on the Dana series. What's the ceiling for this guy? I mean, this is a division that's kind of desperate for, sort of a second tier to go and challenge the top guys in the division. What is his ceiling at this stage of his career?
Yeah, he's a knockout artist, and again, make no mistake, he has been around the block. He went 4-1 in Bellator, where he then went over to Contender Series, and made his Octagon debut back in 2018 with a first-round stoppage. He is a vicious knockout artist. All but 2 of his victories have come by knockout, and it's one of those things that the sky is the limit for this kid. This guy, I really do believe that, only because it's not just his knockouts. That's how he's been finishing guys right now. But when you're down at that level of talent, he's doing everything you should, much like a Greg Hardy. That's what leads you to believe that they should be good on the next level, but you just never know. And so his pressure is what sets him apart from a guy like Hardy. His athleticism, even though, Hardy is a physical freak, he just knows how to use it better. So if things break right for him, he dedicates himself. I mean, the sky really is the limit, in my opinion. So I think you're buying at the absolute bottom of the market here. And maybe I'm seeing this totally wrong. I've seen this fight play out the last 10 times, or at least the last 5 with Arlovski. And it's ended 2-8 or 8-2. And so it would, depending on how you look at it. So I think this price should just be much higher.
Anything else on the prelims that you like?
We break this down. I mean, Ben Saunders is a guy I feel like we just have to always talk about. I will never trust Ben Saunders. I don't trust Ben Saunders. Fight IQ is first and foremost the absolute best thing, or the thing I put the most stock into here, and he has none of it. And so that to me is something of an auto fade. I don't know how long Ben Saunders is for this world. And the UFC is kind of trying to prop him up and give him guys that he can get, but he's paying that back right now with a guy like Sato, who is a knockout artist. And look, when you look at Ben Saunders, I mean, he has been knocked out what seemingly is time and time again in a very vicious in almost, cringeworthy fashion. And at some point you may have to, kind of take his life, look at his life instead of his career here. So I think that price is right about where it should be at -195. I will never bet on Saunders, and, any time it's under -200 against him, or I'm getting underdog money, whatever the case may be, I think that the long play of fading Ben Saunders will prove to be a very profitable one in the long run. After that, as I look down, there's really not a ton on here. Had some guys pull out, pull back in. McGee and Lima. Diego Lima, the brother of the other brother. And McGee, look, -165 for a guy like Court McGee may seem a little bit steep here, but he is not Douglas Lima. Diego Lima is, I believe, 2-4 outside the UFC, while his brother is out there smashing everyone. McGee should be able to frustrate him, work his kind of journeyman point-like decision style to frustrate him, and Lima should take another loss here. So the McGee -165, right in range as well.
Well, we'll do what we did last week and take a little bit of a look ahead here to next week's card up in Ottawa, Ontario. So we got a Canadian fight card here, which means obviously a lot of Canadian fighters going to make their way onto this one. Have you looked ahead at this card at all, Christian? Any early thoughts on it as we wait for lines to come out?
So the first thing I will say is, if you think judges' decisions are bad in Brazil, you have not seen nothing like you will see in Canada. Now, we do have a bantamweight fight with 2 Canadians, so that one should be scored fairly. But we saw this in Russia, another notoriously kind of crooked one. Again, this is Brazil, this is Canada, and I would even add Russia to that mix, as we just saw. Not that there was something incredibly egregious there, but when Russians win that many decisions, I think it makes a sense to kind of look at this. In Canada, I would put is number 1, Brazil even number 2, even worse than there. So you have to take that into account. This fight between Shane Burgos and Cub Swanson should be violence personified. I think that's going to be a fantastic fight. Elias Theodorou, probably the most boring UFC fighter on the roster that everyone hates, that I absolutely love. All he does is throw a kick, get a point, and run around for 30 seconds. And I think that is, when you're an overbetter, when you're a guy who just, loves fight IQ, you're not going to find one better than Elias Theodorou doing exactly what he does to win, right in the Tyron Woodley, Wonderboy Thompson, Daniel Cormier type of mold there. So great fight there against Brunson. Iaquinta, Cowboy Cerrone, always a treat. Brad Katona, I think Divalushi is going to be violence personified as well. So a lot to look forward there. Zahabi in there at 7-1 has been a very exciting fighter to watch come up against Morales. So a lot going on over there as well.
Should be a good one to talk about then next week with Christian Pina, again, from the Sports Gambling Podcast. You can check out his preview here of UFC on ESPN +8 over at bangthebook.com. And you can follow him on Twitter at Christian Pina, Pina. Christian, always a treat, man. Thank you so much for joining me. I'll talk to you again next week.
All right, buddy. Enjoy the fights this weekend. Good luck.
There you go. Christian Pina, once again, from the Sports Gambling Podcast, also our UFC writer over at bangthebook.com. Check me out on Monday with a new edition of the Bettors Box, including the Monday mailbag at Skating Tripods on Twitter or Adam at bangthebook.com via email if you've got questions for that. That'll do it for me. Thank you so much for listening, everybody, and I will talk to you again on Monday.